Our greatest challenge as a species is to reconnect with what it means to be a human being as a part of nature.
A lot of meat now that we have.
What's up, everybody? Rob Nelson here with Stone Age Man. Today I am talking to Mansal Denton. He is a fascinating person who wrote this book, Sacred Hunting, Rekindling an Ancient Spiritual Practice. I've talked to Mansal all for over a year now, and I just got the opportunity to join him on a special combat veteran hunt in the Texas Hill Country. It was very special to me to be able to not only watch what was happening to all the different participants, but also to have my own experience. If you haven't seen the video that we did for veterans, and then the additional behind the scenes video, those are on the Stone Age Man channel. I'm trying a new format here today. This is where we talk about things in long form, more podcast style. So I had an interview with Mansal, which didn't really make the final cut, but I thought was very worth listening to how he views humans' integration with nature. Even though I didn't film myself asking the questions, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play the whole interview, and I'm going to intersplice it with more or less the questions that I asked here in the studio. So it's kind of a retrofitted piece, but I think it works well. I hope you can listen through it and enjoy listening to Mansal. All right, with that said, I wanted to know first how he describes what he does to somebody who has no idea.
The way I describe my organization is it is a way to facilitate transformation for people, whether that be spiritual, emotional, mental, or physical growth. And I use very specific tools, Native American, indigenous rites and rituals, hunting as a cornerstone practice and skill, and then psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, in order to provide connection to ourselves, to a certain perspective that comes from hunting and killing animals.
So I wanted him to explain why he uses all of these tools together. Like, what is his process?
For someone who is not well versed in indigenous cultures, they seem almost haphazardly thrown together, but there's a real intention behind all of them. So our ancestors would have been very commonly using different rites and rituals, whether it be the Native American sweat lodge or tobacco ceremony. They would have also used any kind of altered state of consciousness that they could. Oftentimes for indigenous people, it was so that they could connect to the spirits of animals that they hunted or connect to the plant spirits of their surroundings. But for us, we're in a completely different worldview, different perspective, and so I bring them together, honoring the ancient methods of using them, but with a different purpose. So for example, we use them to have deeper connection to our emotions and feelings, something that we often are not given permission to experience in our day-to-day life in modern society. So those are the core, and then as you said, there are some additional ones. So I bring in something called circling and authentic relating. These are different interpersonal communication skills and games and prompts, which essentially foster a deeper sense of brotherhood, because again, we did not grow up, I'll speak for myself, I did not grow up with really great communication and emotional awareness and intelligence. And so we utilize these different skills and frameworks to foster brotherhood that would have been inherent for our ancestors.
And of course, I had to know why he was so passionate about what he does.
It has had such an outsized impact on my life. I'm really just packaging different things that were healing for me, that feel really resonant to a primal part of myself. I'm also sharing something that I found healing growing up, trying to be more connected to masculinity, having absolutely zero connection to nature until I started to engage in these practices. And so for me, it's really just a process of gifting to others what I have been gifted because I stumbled on it myself. And that's really been the journey of it. And what I come to realize when I speak with people is it sounds and it seems to be somewhat special or unique in the modern day, given most people live in houses, work in, their office buildings. But really all I'm doing is pulling together some of the most core human elements that is true to our species. Hunting for our own food, being connected to nature without technology, without our phones, being connected with a brotherhood or a group of people, a tribe that all have a shared mission, a shared goal. We're in it together, we're supporting one another, we're using these rituals to have a greater perspective on our life and the things that are important to us. So it's really seems complicated, but is very, very simple.
I will say I agree with Mansal in so much of what he does. It's a mindset that I have, but I don't lead trips. It made me wonder if he himself could see the need for people to be an active part of nature. In other words, also including the hunting part.
I realize that not everybody can spend all of their life in nature, and the same is true for me. There's desires for me to be a part of society and in a city in certain instances with people. But I do feel like immersing oneself in nature, and not just camping and being a viewer of nature, but hunting and being an active participant in nature, is one of the most important things that we can do as humans for our own consciousness, so that we may see what it takes to take a life. Because most of us eat meat, and we have a connection at least once in our life that's imprinted somewhere on our heart, our soul, around what pain or suffering or trauma could exist as a result of our existence. And when we consider ourselves to be separate from nature, that really was, if you want to use a biblical metaphor, our fall from the Garden of Eden. Was feeling as though nature is everything else, the plants, the flowers, the rocks, the waters, the trees, the animals, but not us. And that shows up in so many ways. The way that we are disconnected as a society from nature shows up in the way we treat our food system. I mean, no person with an open heart could treat animals in the way that they're treated with factory farms. No person with an open heart could treat trees and forests the way we deforest them. It's the disconnection from nature that causes all of that. And we even see it today in people who have well-meaning but very intellectual solutions to many of our problems. Look at some of the Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger, just to name names. And I do believe there's some well-intentioned desires there, but they're so disconnected from nature. They don't realize that monocropping fields leads to the loss of biodiversity, loss of life, loss of, all the animals that are in these farmlands. And so, yeah, I do think that it is our greatest challenge as a species is to reconnect with what it means to be a human being as a part of nature.
We talked before I came about the different theologies of humans and how they view nature. You got kind of a herding mentality with Christianity, and you have more of a hunter-gatherer mentality. I just wanted to know where he fit in with his view of nature.
Yeah, I think there's a real difference between, and this is one of the reasons why I lean so heavily on indigenous cultures, there is a real difference between using this power that we have and wielding it responsibly as essentially God or nature's greatest technology, humanity, versus these animal unconscious impulses that create destruction and chaos, which we, not always, but are often the creators of. And so even when you bring this example of the Christian worldview, the dominion over nature, we have to remember that where did Judeo-Christian values come from? They emerged from a people who were herders. The shepherd, Jesus was a shepherd, and this story, the motif is clear throughout. And when you are shepherds, you now have your whole life in these animals, which must be protected from the predators of wolves and bears and things like that. If you come to the indigenous people in the North Americas who didn't domesticate animals for their livelihood, they saw predators as revered, sacred beings that were cornerstones of the ecosystem. And so we can see just how these theologies, and there's many beautiful things about Christianity, but these theologies, they bifurcate from what is most authentically human, which is the hunter-gatherer lifestyle that we were brought up in.
I wanted to know how he viewed these in-person experiences, especially how they relate to emotions.
The way that I view the in-person experiences that I create is as an artist. I'm an artist of a certain type of experience because although I do want people to walk away with skills, more importantly, I want them to walk away transformed. And so a type of experience like this is designed to antagonize in certain situations, to provoke in certain situations. And I have done this enough over the years to realize the different things that provoke some type of emotion. And really, emotions are at the heart of what I do because we go through our day-to-day life, we are oftentimes numb to our emotions, mostly because we are doing work that numbs us, whether it's computer work or something like that. And so my goal really is, how do I create scenarios that push through this numbness into creating a feeling, a sensation, an emotion? And how does that feeling and sensation, emotion allow you to transform as an individual? So for example, to first start off on a Thursday where we are meeting together for the first time, got a bunch of new people. Okay, we're gonna go through some connective exercises. We're gonna play some games that allow you all to share what's on your heart. Some people come from all over the country. They want to, learn how to hunt, but the first thing they're doing is sharing like what's going on at home that they feel sad about or that they have a realization around. And so it's really creating connection. That's what I'm trying to provoke first, is connection. Then we go into a sweat lodge, which is very hot, very intense, very ritualistic and ceremonial. And that intensity, that heat, brings up a lot. Claustrophobia, a feeling of discomfort, a feeling of this internal process. Can I make it through the whole sweat lodge? Am I gonna give up? Do I feel shame about giving up? So it's bringing up all these things through an embodied practice. And that goes on throughout the weekend. I'm not gonna tell you all the secrets, but it goes on throughout the entire weekend, intending for things like ceremony, like having meals in a very specific way, like having connection points with the whole group in a very specific way. It's all intentional to provoke and then integrate those feelings and emotions that come up. Hopefully that gives a better sense.
The question that still comes to my mind is hunting. Why hunting and why use psychedelics?
Taking the life of an animal is an incredibly intimate act. I'm asking this being, this mammal that has a family, that has some type of sentience that I don't fully understand, I'm asking it for its life force to bring it into me. That is incredibly vulnerable and intimate. And it's very easy in today's world for us to see that act and intellectualize about it and say, I eat meat, so I have to kill this animal, and not feel fully what the impact is on us of taking the life of an animal, of seeing an animal in its final moments. And so what the psychedelics do is they help to create a container for people to go fully into their emotions. And what might come up from killing an animal in that intimate act is one's own fear of death, or the loss of a family member, or all the death that has come up in one's life for the food that they eat and the waste that they create. And so the plant medicine in a previous setting with indigenous people often would have been used differently. They would have used the plants, they would have used the psychedelics for the purposes of connecting with the spirit of the animals and of the land. And although that is present for us, we are using it in a slightly different way, because as modern people, we need a little bit of support to get into connection with our emotions and our feelings. And ultimately, the emotions and the feelings, that's what creates the transformation. I can't read a book and intellectualize my way into transformation. If I meet somebody and a year later I meet them and they say, "Whoa, you've changed," it's not because of the books that I've read. It's because of the experiences that I've been through that have elicited an emotion, a feeling that I have worked through in myself. And so that's really why they go together. What's the feeling and how do you feel it deeper and more intensely?
Personally, I know a lot of people who are very interested in the idea of psychedelics, but they also are afraid to take that next step. So mentally, they like the idea, but taking that leap is difficult, and I wanted to know his thoughts on that.
There's an endless well of fear and desire for control that psychedelics don't offer in the experience itself that scares people. Yeah, people feel fear around not being in control. I can't tell you the number of people who have expressed fear around doing ayahuasca because they didn't want to vomit. So there's their perception of themselves, and obviously these people are on their own journey and they'll have to cross that bridge. But the irony is, the people who don't understand the feelings and emotions that come from psychedelics are the ones who are being blocked by their feelings and emotions from doing psychedelics.
So I've noticed that a lot of people that I've come across that have different mental health issues, sometimes their emotions are just dulled. Although that doesn't seem to make sense, they're often also living in a small confined space. They're not going out into nature as much as I would assume would be natural. And I wanted to know what his thoughts were on that.
Absolutely, and I don't think that that's rare at all. Again, you shared about their going to their corporate jobs, and I'm sure they have responsibilities and families and things like that. There's a monotony that's broken up by a still monotonous beach trip sometime in the year. And humans were not meant to be in that environment. My judgment is humans were not meant to be in that environment, and the only way that we can be in that environment, the coping mechanism that is so unique to humans, is we just numb ourselves from feeling a sense of loss or lack of fulfillment or lack of connection to the sun and nature and the things that were meaningful for our species. To go to a 9-to-5, we have to numb ourselves. And the problem with numbing ourselves as it pertains to our work is that we cannot numb one area of ourselves. We just numb everything. And I've been guilty of that in my own life at times, just feeling like I had a specific goal and I wanted to orient towards that goal, and I was going to use caffeine and other stimulants, and I was just going to numb to be successful. And I had my phase of that in my early 20s, trying to be an entrepreneur, and sure enough, I didn't feel anything. I didn't know how to relate with women in a romantic setting because I didn't know what my own feelings were. And so, yeah, I think there's a real sense of, or there's a real problem with numbing ourselves in one areas of our life because it numbs us in all areas.
I was actually very curious how he saw his role in all of this, if he saw himself as an evangelist or tried to get people to break out of their emotions. That was important for me going in, at least.
I don't really want to be in the business or spend my energy or life force trying to convince somebody of any kind of way. The only thing that I want to do is I want to live my life so fully, authentically focused on me and my emotions and what comes from my emotions and being with them fully. I want that to be so inspiring that those people who are ready to receive it do so, and they say yes, and they have me support them, a few steps ahead on the path. And I've had people who have come on sacred hunting experiences and they've gone back within a couple months. They quit their corporate job and they started doing their own thing. And So yeah, for me, I want to be clear, the people who are numb, I have a great sense of empathy for them. And it's not that I consider them to be, blind, or it's not that I consider them to be unable to see. Oftentimes, these are people who are genuinely, their perspective, and I understand and empathize with it, is that they have a family and they have a responsibility and they are doing their best to meet the obligations so that their children or their wives can have a great life. And I understand that trade-off. And so my goal would be, how do I inspire them not to give that up, but to find ways within whatever responsibility that they have in their life to be more expressed, to feel more authentically, and maybe create a side project or even just show up for their children in a more authentic and connected way.
One of my theories is that we are disconnected with our human biology. That's causing a lot of the mental health crisis that we have today. And so I was just very curious how he viewed it, if he had a similar view as mine.
And this is my bias. My bias is that humanity, if we look back from a evolutionary perspective, where we really started to struggle is when we left the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and we moved into an agrarian lifestyle. And that showed up in all different types of ways, whether it be our interpersonal relationships and how solidified monogamy became as a result of that, how warlike we became when we had to protect our plot that comes with a certain level of scarcity. Someone's always going to come take mine, instead of hunter-gatherers who could just move on to the next pasture, the next whatever the case is. And so I see how far we are from our evolutionary being to be a huge cornerstone problem for our society. And in fact, one of the reasons why I create these experiences so fundamentally towards how we evolved is because I want to give people a taste, even for just a weekend, of what it's like to be in relationship with our food in that way, with other people in that way, with technology in that way. It gives people a flash in their life of insight of, hey, this is what it could be like. So they can go into their day-to-day life changed. They have it, they remember it. Somewhere in their soul, there's a remembering that's not just from their ancestors, it's in them. They've experienced this. And ultimately, that can give them a way, tools that can support them in bringing that into their day-to-day life. Because there are so many little things that we can do to bring us back into a type of relationship like our ancestors had.
I've had experiences where I go camping, and that camping experience over a weekend, even though it's intense, can actually allow me to integrate the rest of my life very well. So I was curious if he thought these were a little bit like a biohack. In other words, you do this short experience, it allows you to live in the modern world for 6 months or a year, or if he viewed them in some other way.
I do believe that if people come on experiences like mine or others on a regular basis, they can start to shift their day-to-day life. But as with anything, it is also easy to have a transformational experience and then get bogged down in the day-to-day rituals of life, whatever those might be. So it's definitely possible, but it's up to the individual to have the desire to want to, create a hybrid of our ancestral environment with the way that we live today. And it can seem really daunting, but over time, people will be able to have a more and more of a sense of how they can do that. And one of the reasons why I think hunting is such a cornerstone practice for it is because, God willing, people come back with meat. And that meat becomes the meditation or the prayer or the remembrance of what that was like into our day-to-day life. It's one of the things that I find so valuable about not buying meat from the grocery store the past 6 years is because every day that black bear sausage that I had this morning, it's a reminder, it's a prayer, it's some type of meaningful connection to that place in Canada when I went hunting for that black bear. And it gives us that consistent daily practice, because we need that. We need to eat. That's the hack almost. We need to eat, and we have this connection to this food. We have a connection to this way of life.
If you're like me, you probably have a view of a stereotypical trophy hunter. Oftentimes this comes with negative connotations. I was very curious if his views of hunting were different than that stereotyped view that we have in the media these days.
I feel very blessed that I started hunting later in life. So I was 26, 27 years old when I started hunting. And I'm also, for a man especially, quite sensitive, quite emotional, quite emotionally sensitive. And that combination of doing something new that is very intimate, in some ways very uncomfortable, and being very sensitive just created a dynamic for me where hunting, it was not something that I just grew up with and was numb to the emotions of, because I hadn't. And because I came to it with fresh eyes and with sensitive eyes, it forced me into a level of like care and feeling that permeates the way that I view my hunting practice. It is a spiritual practice to be in a place of that like deep sensations, feelings, and emotions. And the generous view that I have of other methods of hunting that are more common in America is that many people are numb, just like we talked about already. They're numb to their feelings with their family, with their job, with their work, and so they're also numb to the death of an animal and the intensity that that brings. And that's, to me, that's more sad than it is bad. I feel sad for someone who is so numb to the experience of taking a life that they laugh about such a situation. I understand the pride and the joy of killing an animal to provide for a family. So sometimes joy can be synonymous with some of those less desirable ways that people, manage with hunting. But I do think that it's more sad than anything that people are disconnected from how intense of an experience it is. And it's just a reflection of how disconnected people are in general.
Now, I have 2 kids. I also talk to a lot of people about their mental health. And I've found that a lot of people don't have emotional intelligence. And by that, I mean they don't know how to talk about their emotions. And I was curious if he had the same experience as I had.
Yeah, I have many people who come on these experiences, think that they're coming to learn hunting, and they walk away more changed by the types of conversations that they have during the experience and the depth of the conversations, the depth that they can go within themselves that they didn't even know was possible. And so that's a huge part of it. And it's more of a symptom. They walk away with those skills because they've had to kind of face the fire, as it were, to express themselves, be vulnerable in that kind of container. And that modeling from other people, I'm always involved in that process of sharing how things are going for me, what's going on for me, and so I model it for others, but then I also invite them and ask them to practice it, and they get to learn and see from others as well. So I absolutely believe that people walk away from these experiences with more emotional intelligence and more language for speaking to things. And I think also a big part of it is more permission to share their emotions and feelings, because that's the container that has been set. And so, in what ways do you, Rob, have an opportunity to share more feelings with your son, how you're feeling first, in order to invite him into a deeper permission to share his feelings. There's a great metaphor about who's going to put the shield down first. We all walk around with this emotional shield, and in order to connect with somebody, someone's got to put it down first and say, hey, I'm feeling really sad that I haven't been able to connect with you, and I see this shared interest, and I wish we were friends, but I just haven't been able to connect with you. That is putting a shield down in order to give the other person an opportunity to do the same.
Clearly, Mansal does this experience with lots of different types of people, but in this particular one, the one I'm joining, he was doing it specifically for combat veterans, so I wanted to know where that idea came from and why combat veterans.
I'm really excited to lead this group of people this weekend because they are all combat veterans. And the idea for this experience emerged from having a combat veteran attend a sacred hunting experience organically. And this was someone who was deeply struggling from PTSD from the human life that he had killed years ago, decades ago. And he had done a lot of self-work to get to a place where he finally felt ready to pick up a gun again and to be in that archetype of the killer, of the hunter, of the predator, and kind of reclaim and integrate that into his life. And so for a lot of combat veterans, they are taught how to be numb in order to do their job, complete the mission, which is often killing other humans. And that takes a certain amount of compartmentalizing, and that takes its toll, and that's why we see so many veterans who have PTSD. And so these veterans, after they get back, especially the ones who start to heal this PTSD, they go into a phase where they reject the violence. And it's understandable for people who have, such triggers around violence to really reject it. And this experience is kind of what I see as the final step in the healing of a veteran. How do you heal through the violent parts of oneself and then come out on the other side reintegrating them, knowing that there's a way that this hunter and this killer can be of service through killing an animal to provide for a family, to provide for oneself, to support the land. Oftentimes hunting is done to support the land. And so it's taking this killer archetype and it's turning it on its head. No longer do they have to feel ashamed of this great power that they have as killers. Now they can feel empowered to be in service through this skill that they've developed.
At this stage, I still want to know more about the psychedelics. Why use them in conjunction with all of these other techniques?
As we talked about before, the psychedelics create the feelings and emotions for people, and they can release them instead of holding them as stuck. And that's the key. That's what psychedelics, and that's what any kind of modality that helps people feel more deeply, that's the gift that they provide, is the gift of being able to go through the process. So when someone has depression, it is said that depression is anger turned inwards. And so if someone who has depression just had an outlet, had the opportunity, had the words, had the space, permission to express their anger, they wouldn't feel the depression. And so similarly with PTSD, there's emotions of shame and guilt and sadness and grief. And so the psychedelics, they often provide them the opportunity to experience those feelings. And feelings are meant to come through us and then out of us. When an animal, for example, a rabbit is chased by a fox, there's fear in the nervous system of that animal. And oftentimes these animals will shake vigorously. They are allowing their nervous system to shake off the fear. They might not cry like us, but they shake. and that is their way of releasing that fear from the nervous system. And the same is true for humans. We need to have ways in which we can release our nervous system of these emotions. And sometimes it's through tears and crying, sometimes it's through screaming, sometimes it's through pounding. Whatever the case is, they need to have that opportunity. And so the psychedelics are not necessary, but as I said before, we just don't have the tools to readily feel our feelings and just express them in the ways that we might have in the past. And so the psychedelics give people the opportunity to do so in an easier way.
All of this was fascinating to me. I wanted him here to elaborate one final time on the tools that he's using, just so that I could wrap my head around it one last time.
I have many tools, and I have a certain, because of my sensitivity and emotional intelligence, I know when to use what tools to the best of my ability, and not always perfect, but that's part of the artistry. This tool needs to go here, this tool needs to go there, this tool needs to go here. The tools that I use that are most impactful are psychedelics. Also, learning the skill of hunting is a tool that elicits emotion. There is contemplative or meditative practices. I use journaling, authentic relating, circling, indigenous practices like sweat lodge or smudging, which is kind of cleansing using smoke. Tobacco, smoking tobacco is another kind of indigenous practice. So that's at least 7 right there. I also use nature immersion. I take people's phones away so they don't have their phone for the duration of the experience.
I appreciate you all listening to this format, whether you're on YouTube or some other platform. I wanted it to be something that you could get something out of. I asked Mansal here right at the end, if you're interested in this, how do you sign up? Is there a way that you can find out what he does, and is it open for all people?
Yeah, I would love to have men and women, whoever wants to join, visit sacredhunting.com, and there's a quick 2-minute application, and that will allow you to set up a call with me, because I like to connect with everybody, make sure that everyone is a fit for the experiences, because so much is the group that's curated, and look forward to speaking with you and seeing if there's an opportunity for you to join.
There you go, everyone. Mansal Denton. I'm recording this piece, of course, after the fact. I had an amazing time, not just in watching the veterans heal through their trauma and understand how they were using psychedelics in many different ways, but also to see how hunting was an important piece to this puzzle, kind of bring the view of the healthy warrior back in. And that is something that I had not heard of before, and I found it really important. It fits with my views on reintegrating the Stone Age man mindset, which I'll explain more in other videos, but and I will do some more in the future. So I hope you learned something from Mansal. We are doing a live Patreon Q&A with Mansal this Wednesday, which you're only going to see if you found this right away, but I have the recorded session on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/unsamescience. Thanks everyone. We'll see you in the next one.